Hey everybody, Bobby Medina here with my buddy Paul Barron, and today we are bringing you a very special guest. He has a very interesting background. He grew up in Rockford, Illinois, playing in a junior drum and bugle corps, and I remember I come from a drum corps background too, and I remember the Phantom Regiment back in those days. In college, you were playing big band jazz, and you were having a little bit of issues, which we can maybe talk about later on. And then you went on the road with a circus, and that's a whole other story. But the circuses have ruined many a fine trumpet player over the years, as have cruise ships and other kinds of gigs. And you studied over at Georgia State University and began to study with more symphony players, primarily the principal at that time, John Head, who was your teacher and mentor. And then you've had a distinguished and a very busy freelance career playing in Atlanta in 80 through 87, as well as, with visiting acts and all the cool things that we do as trumpet players. And you were an extra with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And also you had auditioned and been appointed Principal Trumpet of the New Mexico Symphony Orchestra in Albuquerque between 87 and 92. And then you had some other studies, I guess, during those years with some big names in the trumpet world, Vincent Cichowicz, Bud Herseth, Jacobs, Clevenger. And in 92, you won the second trumpet utility position with the Metropolitan Orchestra. And then you moved over to third, I guess, upon the retirement of James Pandolfi. And you recently retired from the Met. So, and I guess the other thing I need to tell everybody is you have a fantastic new book out that I've been enthralled with reading. I couldn't put it down, which is called The Singing Trumpet, published by Carl Fisher. So welcome, Peter Bond.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I've enjoyed your interviews with other players.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I'm going to throw out the first question. And reading your book, the very first thing that struck me was when you started talking about the mask. And that was a concept that was presented to me by an old mentor way back in about 1978, a trombone player that played a lot of classical stuff. He was the principal of the Vancouver Opera Orchestra. As well, he played with Harry James and on and on. But he said, think of the mask, but he didn't tell me anything more than that. So for the next 20 years, I was going, okay, well, he says the mask, there's got to be something to that. And then I read it in your book. So can we start off? Can you explain to the rest of us, me included, what exactly that means?
As best I can. I think there are two schools of singing. There are opera, leader, choral singers, what we call trained singers, and they maximize the resonance of their body. Principally the head voice, and they talk about projecting through the mask, and that will be the sinuses, and they feel like they're projecting in this way, and it's a way of maximizing resonance for projection. And then all the other singers, pop, rock and roll, Broadway, etc., use a less resonant technique. Little more in chest voice. It's more compressive, less resonant, not less expressive, but less resonant. And so, and if you've ever heard an opera singer sing a pop song, it's kind of like, and likewise, few pop singers will try to sing opera because it's so different, it's so weird, but we have to, as trumpet players, we have to cross over idioms all the time. And so I'm thinking, in the mask and maximum resonance, playing, vocal transcriptions or orchestra music or solo literature, whereas in a commercial, commercial setting, I haven't done commercial music in many years. It's more parallel with those kind of singers. So, a little bit more compressive, a little bit less resonant in the body, not less expressive, but it's a different thing. And we've all heard, a symphony player conservatory guy steps into the big band and it just doesn't work. The style issues aside, it's just like the sound is wrong, and vice versa. You get a lead player and you put him in the orchestra, it's kind of like, it doesn't quite work. But I think we can use these parallels to, these vocal techniques to kind of be the right guy and kind of change personalities the way an actor would. So yeah, when I'm playing, I'm thinking of projecting in this way as opposed to pushing sound through the horn. And I think of I'm resonating here, and I treat the trumpet as an extension of my body rather than an instrument that I blow into. So that's my thinking there. And I've just moved the engine from here, the vocal cords, to there. But all the other things are as much the same as I can make them. The resonance in the mouth and articulation and placing high, thinking for us trumpet players, thinking in falsetto, deep, raises the soft palate, very conducive for playing the trumpet. Trombone players, that's in their vocal range, at least for the men. So they've got it made. We're way up high. So those parallels have been very helpful for me. And articulating exactly like I speak. I'm from Northwest of Chicago, is basically anchor tonguing. I didn't know it at the time, but I always said that, and I could always do these freakish things like lip trills and flexibilities. And then somebody at once said, "Hey, you did that anchor tonguing thing," and I said, I didn't know what it was, but it was just the way I speak. For my students, I call it the Chicago speech impediment.
Well, you have some really great sayings in there. I can't remember. There was a 3-word one that had tuba in it. And I said that over and over, just feeling where my tongue was when I said that. And by God, it was exactly as you described. I never knew that I did an anchor tongue. I had no idea. And when I tried to do it on trumpet, I failed.
Yeah, but anchor tongue is a horrible name. I mean, it sounds like some kind of dental procedure. It's just awful. I think Herbert Clark coined it, but I think it's the way most people speak North American English. And we're all a little bit different. So, I think anchor tonguing, there's a range of, some people do more forward, some backwards. I have a very large tongue. Not everybody does. And so I think a good rule of thumb is if you articulate pretty close to the way you speak, you can have your maximum expression and fluidity and speed and all those other things that we need. But the more it's like anchor tonguing, that arch in the front of the mouth, serves an acoustical purpose in I'll say classical music, and a compressive, velocity for guys who did that high velocity commercial playing. And fortunately, it's the same thing. So it's kind of a win-win.
Well, I think it's really cool. I have to tell everybody the title of the book is The Singing Trumpet, but it's the subtitle here is what really intrigued me. And it says using singing and speech as literal models for trumpet performance. And I think that's great. So why don't you just continue a little bit, and why don't you explain singing and speech there as it relates in these parallel worlds, like you're talking about the pop and the opera as opposed to commercial and classical trumpet playing. I think it's really interesting.
Okay. I tell my students, or so anyone who comes to a lesson the first thing I do is, this is an exercise that's in the book. I'll have them place their hand on their sternum, take a normal breath on their breastbone, have them take a normal breath and blow a wind stream like they're blowing out a candle. And I'll say, beautiful. Now, place your hand here again, take the same breath, and sing a note. Octave of your choice, right? And sing some note. Then I'll have them blow the candles out again. And I'll say, do you notice anything happening differently beneath your hand? And and I'll get various answers. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. And I'll say, I can see it. Your chest collapses when you blow, and it stays elevated when you sing. And singers call that keeping the chest open. And my students call it superhero posture or opera star posture, because they feel very, I love you, I hate you, I kill you, that's opera star thing, right? But, and if you see Maurice Andre and any number of famous, players, they're playing like that, and the relationship of their head, etc. But anyway, so I'll ask them, all right, so you're singing the note, and we'll do a falsetto note if it's a trumpet player. Deep. I'll say, how much air are you using? Not much. Yeah, not much at all. And even if you yell, I'll say, are you blowing your voice? No. Okay. Well, why don't we try to do the same thing on the trumpet? Okay. So instead of blowing the sound through the horn, which was impossible anyway, it's a physical impossibility. It's an illusion. So instead of going, I lost my train of thought a little bit. So I said, all right, so the chest collapses. I beg your pardon. So, all right. So the point is the body uses the air differently to sing than it does to blow. And we're taught to blow. And the kid says, of course, you idiot. It's a wind instrument. But I'll say, okay, why don't we use a singing technique instead? And this was driven home to me. At the opera, we have these rehearsals called Sitzprobes, which is a rehearsal with just the orchestra and the principal singers and the conductor. And you work out, tempi and blah, interpretation, etc. And so these singers would be sitting right behind me and I'd be watching them. And any number of them can bury a 100-piece orchestra with no microphone and it's sounding fantastic. And they're not doing any of the histrionic breathing that I was taught. They're not turning red in the face. And I thought, can I do what they do? And, because I'm holding my trumpet feeling like a fool, because they're just, it's like crazy. And lo and behold, it works. So I'm thinking about using my wind, and if anything, I lift up from the center of my body, which oddly enough kind of coincides with some of the yoga things that you heard from Maynard Ferguson, people like that. It's just not as extreme. So I think it's all a kind of a continuum. So I think of my torso as a cylinder. When I take a breath, everything gets bigger from the center. And I just imagine there's a piston in the middle and it just comes up gently. Like I would sing happy birthday to you or whatever. And for this to work really well, the chops have to be fairly optimal. But then I can use, and I just think of making the sound pretty much in my head or in my mouth. And I think I was very happy to see, was it Louis Dowdeswell that you guys interviewed?
Yes.
Tremendous English player. And he was saying much the same thing, although he lives in a completely different world. So if you're anchor tonguing, ta, 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 I think of the tongue is forward and the roof of the mouth is here and the teeth are there. And I call that area the Bermuda Triangle. And I try to control everything from the Bermuda Triangle within reason. And I can pressurize that, relax my chops, and I can get a very fiery sound, or I can get a very, mellow sound. And it's, so I'm thinking of singing and using my air like a singer until you get to, above high C, then you sort of have to go into turbo because the physics of the instrument change. Now it's a little more of a megaphone.
I think one of the things that you were alluding to it a while ago, this anchor tongue is I've never really cared for it as well,
yeah.
But it leads a lot of people to believe the tip of their tongue is down in a certain place and everything is tongued with the tongue in that position.
Yeah.
And the fact is, at least when I do it, because I do both, I go actually between the two, but it raises, where your tip is, it floats back there, depending on what register you're in. So it's not really anchored.
Yeah, I've done moving X-rays. I've done moving X-ray things playing, and I can not to necessarily. I have a very large tongue, but you're right. I think of the tongue as just kind of floating or rubbing or hanging out. It just winds up there. How many places can it be if you're articulating a little further back? But I was able to articulate from low C, G, middle C, high C, and my tongue remained exactly the same. But the rest of my tongue, you could see it go boop 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 boop, and and that was the source of one of the pictures in my book. I just copied my own X-ray. But but one of the dangers is, people say tongue level and raise your tongue to go high and stuff. If you do it in the back, if you go like that, that's trouble. And I speak from painful firsthand experience about that, because that's where you get your blackouts, and you're it's like choking a hose, and you just you bring up the pressure, and you've got those crazy headaches and Oh, it's awful. So you want that all of resistant the action and action in the front of your mouth, and everything in the back just stays wide open, and there's no problem.
It seems like there's always been a misconception, or at least I had, with the anchor tongue, not to regress necessarily, but where I thought anchor, I mean, that's firm, right? You know,
yeah, like, literal.
You like throw an anchor down teeth from a boat, you don't want that boat to move. So I was pushing against my back teeth.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate name. Yeah, it is. So I just try to, I say tongue like you talk. So I'll have a diagnostic, or I don't have a trumpet with me right now, but the kid goes, I'll say, play some G's for me, you know, and, or some easy note, and pull the horn off your face and keep tonguing and blowing. Ta, 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 and I'll say, is that the way you talk? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Frequently it's, or some variation thereof. And they said, okay, that's not necessarily wrong or anything, but let's try it the way you speak and see what happens. So ta, ta, ta. Then I'll have them put their lips around the outside of the mouthpiece like they're blowing water, and you'll get that characteristic slapping sound that everybody everywhere knows. And I said, okay, now sneak your chaps in the mouthpiece. You're not going to blow nearly that hard, but just ta, ta, ta. And it has the vertical sensation. And some guys call it flat tonguing because ta, ta, it has that vertical feel, feels sloppy. And I use those kind of provocative words. I use blatty, sloppy to try to get them, you know, into a new zone. Fat tonguing, or some people call it flat tonguing. Some people call it fat tonguing because your tongue feels fat in the front of your mouth. And they were told, always keep the airway open and make your mouth as big as possible. And I'll say, yeah, we'll try this different thing and see what happens. And basically it's kind of the way they talk, ta, ta, ta. And we're not going to use any more air than you would say ta, ta, ta. And so we're going to project sound, not necessarily wind. And I try to get the chops to explode, you know, and really fire the trumpet. And I want to get as much sound as I can with as little physical effort. And a lot of times that kind of opens the door to, oh, I don't have to blow my head off to play forte. You know, I can just think of the chops stay relaxed, and I can think of, I'll pressurize a little bit in my mouth if I want to think of it that way, or I think of changing my voice from this to that, you know, so you can have that same kind of subtlety and create these different kinds of sounds. But, you know, for kind of extreme playing, or what I call scorched earth trumpet, you know, I can open my mouth, I can bring my tongue forward, I pressurize that area, and I can play incredibly loud without blowing my head off or tearing up my face. And
well, we were talking, and we just finished a video on and shared it with everybody, Paul and I, about projection. And this is exactly what we were talking about in there, that you don't have to kill yourself. I mean, we want to play as efficiently as we can, and we want to let the horn be as resonant as possible, you know?
Right.
One of the things that I love, Peter, is that you talked about only thinking of projecting the sound, 3 inches or so into the lead pipe, and let the horn take the rest of it from there. If that.
Yeah. So, and again, for what I do, you know, for orchestral music, you certainly want a range of colors. But if I think of everything happening behind the mouthpiece, in my head and in my chest, whatever, I've got control over it. And I want this resonating system to control the other resonating system, which is the instrument. This is endlessly variable and flexible. The trumpet is plumbing.
Yeah.
Sophisticated plumbing, but plumbing, right? So it's fixed. And so I want to control it. I want to use this to control that. And so to the degree, I think inside my mouth and back in my head and stuff, I get a pretty bright sound. Well, so let's say I play Brahms, I want a chorale, that's going to be the wrong tone. At that point, I'll think about 3 inches or 4 inches down the lead pipe, and I will blow a little bit, knowing that blowing the chops will attenuate the high harmonics. Sorry, I got a tractor going by behind me.
We can't hear it. It's fine.
Campus. Yeah. Anyway, so if you blow, the chops go slightly dead. It takes the high harmonics out, and you can use that as an expressive tool to, you know, you can shave those high harmonics and get, even without playing the changing equipment, I can get a warm, rich sound. Or if I think back here and pressurize, I can get a very bright, noisy sound. So I can play a chorale, a fanfare, or make expressive changes within a sonata or a concerto, or, you know, whatever. If that made sense. Sorry.
Absolutely.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great thing. I mean, yes, our equipment changes, high compression, low compression. It changes the type of sound that we have, that it emphasizes the highs or it emphasizes the mids or the lows. But ultimately, at least to a certain degree, we all, you know, I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to go try to play lead trumpet on a 1 1/4 C or something like that.
Oh,
right?
It's fun. You should try it.
I have. It's not for me. I'm not that strong. You know,
neither am I.
But we are able to change. You know, I've noticed that a lot. You know, just by the way we open up, and I have never thought of it though as much as you have in this. I think one of the really cool things that you talk about in here that you use is some of the words you use and the imagery that you project into people's minds, which really helps. It helps make the point, you know, and so I've found it very unique in the way you do it. I really like the book a lot.
I thank you. I'm a kind of a visually oriented person anyway, but I also try to find as many words as I can. You know, we want to have a big toolbox of things that we can use with students. You know, try this, try that. That doesn't work. Okay, think of it this way. Blah blah. And there's no rules really. The only rule there is blowing the phone. You know, beyond that, because as soon as you make a rule, somebody's gonna don't puff out your cheeks. Well, what about the Dizzy Gillespie character?
I know.
Or name your guy, right?
Right. I know. There's always somebody.
So I think if we have some like general, kind of rules of thumb, like for a student, I'm gonna try to articulate like I speak, and I want it to resonate here, and maybe I'm gonna try to do the least and get the most. You can hardly really go wrong, and you'll find your kind of own way. We're all physically a little bit different, and I'm always asking students if they make a good sound or something. I say, well, what were you doing? What was your perception of what you're doing? And sometimes they come up with things I never would have thought of. One student played a fabulous crescendo, and their tone was terrific. And I said, wow, that was exactly what we want. That was amazing. What were you thinking of? And they said, it felt like I had a little ball of energy in my mouth that just got bigger and bigger. And I thought, I'm stealing that. That was great. It's just terrific. And of course, the audience they hear sound, right? And so it's not, so it's an illusion. It sounds like, you're blowing for the exit signs, or the marching band kids are blowing for the press box or whatever. Then it sounds like you're blowing your head off. But no, the people who can really play, they're not doing that. Otherwise, they wouldn't last to the end of the show,
Well, I think the other thing too that's really cool about this, I read a thing a couple of years back where I think it was Malcolm McNabb, and he was saying, I play more efficiently now than I have ever played, And I think as we get older, we need to learn to do that, not only from the standpoint of being more musical, but also from the standpoint of like, I'm not 20 anymore, so I know I don't have the air capacity that I had, but rather than to waste all this wind that I have to let it, work properly, it allows me to play, phrases that maybe I otherwise might not be able to do.
Sure. You've learned to, maybe you don't need all that wind that you use when you're 20, and you're going, there's another way to do this, and I can work, it can be a lot easier. And
I think the trumpet is loud anyways, and with the wind thing, it just becomes so loud. I mean, and there's times when we need that, but overall, it's a pretty darn loud instrument, right?
I never think of wind or air when I play, and that freaks people out. I only think of vibrating and sometimes a little bit of pressurization when I want to like really get a fiery sound. Other than that, I never think about it. I just think about vibrating, and the correct amount of wind follows. Just like you never think about, no one goes, hello, right? When you answer the phone, you don't do that, right? Or, you take a breath. Okay. And I think I'll go out on a limb. I'm not a big fan of these breathing exercises and breathing gym stuff. And that, I think it leads people down kind of it's got to be right for some people, but it leads a lot of kids down kind of the wrong path, that they worry about wind and don't worry about sound and music and all the reason they're doing it in the first place.
Well, something you had in your book that I thought was really cool is to practice in front of a mirror. And unlike what I did when I was practicing in front of a mirror when I was much younger, is I was trying to have the perfect looking embouchure. It was completely aesthetics. It wasn't anything else. But as a
yeah, you and me both.
But as a diagnostic tool, you know, what you were talking about is just looking at the amount of effort that or the appearance of all of this extra wasted effort. And, you know, it makes me think about Maynard Ferguson. We've seen Maynard play live, and that huge breath and all the rest of that stuff. But you know, as we've gotten older and know people that played with Maynard and heard stories that Maynard said, well, yeah, you got to look like you're working really hard because that'll sell tickets. But really, you know, he was so efficient with that. And I think your point about playing in front of a mirror and don't make it look hard, because if you're looking like it's a hard, you know, effort that you're putting into it, it probably is.
Yeah. That was from Arnold Jacobs. He said, you want to project a sense of ease, both orally and visually, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Let's make it look easy. By God, it becomes easy, you know? And the point about Maynard is great because, you know, he knew he was in show business. He said as much, you know, he knew what he was doing, you know. How else could he have such an incredible career?
Yeah, one of a kind, that's for sure. I was going to ask you here, there's so many things, and I know we have just a limited amount of time here. You got so many cool exercises in this book, and you explore all the various ranges of dynamics and colors, and you talk about things. Let's talk a little bit more just from your standpoint about becoming stronger and about, you know, as we age, you know, the trumpet's a bit of a bear to play, even when you're playing it correctly. So what kinds of things do you personally do to stay in shape and to move things, keep things moving forward?
Okay. I guess maybe the one thing that all kind of trumpet players would agree on, I would hope, is you want to have that, I call it the diamond, right? You know, and it's like a tent. It's like you know, you go, the camping tent it's made of flexible material, but you have a rigid structure that supports it, you know, so you've got the aluminum poles and or wooden poles, but the material of the tent remains flexible and pliable and soft or whatever. And I think that's, you know, if you talk to most teachers and players, it says, yeah, you want to have those corners, and that's kind of that's going to, you know, save us, you know, and allow us not to abuse that bit. And so any kind of, and I don't think you have to do necessarily really hard, super loud playing, but you can, you know, for isometric purposes, but you can just play easy exercises, but breathe through your nose and, you know, just hold that, you know, whether it's the, you know, the infamous Cat Anderson, you know, Whisper
G.
Yeah. And, you know, I read Jeff Winstead's book, you know, and where he talks about how to do it. It was kind of like, I was playing in a brass band once. The E-flat cornet player was dodgy, right? The high guy. And then all of a sudden he started like sounding a lot better. I thought, I gotta find out what this guy's doing. And he said, I'm doing this Cat Anderson thing that I read. You know, I thought, okay, I'm gonna try this. And so I did it according to the instruction. And by gum, my high register started getting better. And I went, well, now why does this work? And the idea, you know, and as you guys probably well know, you're supposed to play it with your teeth touching, right? And you play very, very, very soft, and you play it for a long time. You breathe through your nose. Okay, what's it do? Your teeth are touching. You can't roll your chops over your teeth. You can't overlap your chops, which is what so many guys do. And you have to create what's probably your ideal embouchure, right? And then you play super soft, and you can't possibly hurt yourself. So like the worst thing that can happen is you wasted 20 minutes of your life. But it does kind of, you know, it does kind of train this. And I think it's an ingenious study. And I think a lot of teachers have talked about similar kind of things. So a little bit of that playing, and I try to use color, meaning in order to project over decibels, you know. I find the older I get, the more efficient I get. And playing the trumpet is not very difficult, or not, excuse me, that was a terrible thing to say. It's not very physically demanding until we get into the extremities of volume and really high register. But even so, for a young player, you want to, or if I have to play something very high, I will use soft studies to get up there, get the control. It's kind of like the difference between a cabinet maker and a lumberjack. They both work with wood, but that's where the the similarities stops. And I don't want to. I used to play the trumpet like a lumberjack, chopping down a tree. Now I want to do it with some kind of precision, and you get a piece of that high whatever it is, and then I bring it down and I try to tie the registers together, and it's all about getting a certain amount of fluency and control, and stuff. And I do try not to think in stereotypic trumpet terms in the way I was, brought up, whereas, it's like weightlifting and like that. Sure. There's physical component. There's conditioning. There's a little bit of that, of course, but I always try to keep the sound good, as good as I possibly can. I don't want to make poor sounds in hoping to sound better later. So, and I use sound as a diagnostic, right? So if I had a trumpet here, I'd do a demo, but you hear a guy with a miserable tone, it's not going to get much better later, So you start with the tone is a window into the function and how it's working. You hear somebody with a clear, beautiful sound, you go, he's doing it right. This is going to be okay.
Well, I know we're just about out of time. I have one last question I would like to ask you, just because so many people have done this. I could talk to you all day long here, and hopefully we will do that sometime over a beer, because
it'd be lovely,
really fascinating. But we have all had this, whether you're Doc Severinsen or me or Paul or everybody in our group, you're not normal if you haven't experienced beating your chops up and potentially playing in a dysfunctional manner. So I'm curious as to, my getting out of dysfunction was brought about through Jimmy Stamp, pointing out a few things that I had done incorrectly. And then for the rest of my life, it's constantly keeping these things in check for me. I know what makes me tick, but I'm curious as to when you have a student that comes in that just is not playing properly, dysfunctional, can't play high, tone's not great, no fluidity. What do you do to get them out of that?
One of the first things that I do, if a young player comes to me and they have that really ghastly, constipated sound, something like that, particularly young players, I'll say, you remember when you were in beginning band and you picked up the trombone and the tuba and you played those farty, blatty low notes? I want you to do that now on the trumpet. And so you give them permission to sound really obnoxious and terrible. And what you're after, of course, is freedom. And I say, I want a really blatty tone, maybe open your jaw a little bit. More sound comes out. Let your chops flap in the breeze, right? And then they'll suddenly get this sound that makes it's like the horn's going to fall apart in your hands. And we've all, gotten that, kind of over the top sound. And I'll say, that's perfect function. The kid will say, I'll get kicked out of band if I play like that. I say, yes, you will. You're just blowing too hard. And we'll take that really, the blattiness is just all the harmonic activity and they're just blowing too hard. So we're going to take that and we put a decrescendo on it. But we want to keep all that harmonic activity, all that zzz, what the trombone players call the rattle or the burn or whatever. I want all that harmonic activity, and they can generally wind it down to about nothing. And I said, say, we can make that a very humane, kind of thing. And then I'll talk about, we'll establish that. And they say, well, okay, I got a great low C. How do I play other notes? I say, well, we're not going to go up to them. We're going to go forward into them, because there's no such thing as high notes and low notes. There's fast vibrations and slow vibrations. And I get them to maybe think on a more of a horizontal basis, which is a little more in sync with the idea of melody and forward motion. That's one tool I can use. The biggest problem I see is the chops are overlapping. A lot of players will roll their bottom lip over their teeth. And only the top lip vibrates when they do that. And I've done that with experiments. We drilled a hole in a mouthpiece, put a fiber optic camera in there, and only the top lip was moving. It sounded okay, but it wasn't great. And then I pulled my chops up by maybe a millimeter, just a little bit. Tremendous difference in tone. And then when we looked at it in slow motion on the screen, whoop, both chops are moving. It was kind of like I was like an oboe player that only had one reed going. And a lot of players will do that. And so I'll say, let's bring that lower lip out, set a little higher. Roger Ingram talks about that in his book, just Einsetzen, the parallel with Einsetzen, setting in a little bit, getting the meat out of the mouthpiece, having an aperture. So whether you're playing high velocity music or the Haydn trumpet concerto, all the same thing. You want as much color and function as you can possibly get. So that, and then the other thing with the tonguing is the biggest variable in mouth shape. So how you articulate controls the shape, and it's one of the major factors. So I'm big on tonguing as it affects tone. So getting the chops fairly even, get the teeth close as you can, and whatever we can do to get that spark, that sound, that where the horn comes alive. And then we can say, then we have something to talk about. We have common ground. It's go for that feel, go for that tone, whatever. And the student can run with it. Then they can say they have an idea.
I like that you mentioned in the book, how people dread an embouchure change, but it's making these fine adjustments. It's not a big change, and they make a big difference. And this is something that I've personally experienced.
Yeah, I'm doing it all the time. I call them tweaks. If I have to pick off a really high note, super soft, I'll just go burp, a little bit. Burp. It's a little tweak. It's not and we just have so many nerve endings. And I think I put a thing in the book where I drew a line on my face to show how small the adjustment was. But just infinitesimal. But we have so many nerve endings in our mouth. It feels like a big deal. It's not. Everything we play is, whether you're Alan Vizzuti or Bud Herseth or Maurice Andre, it's a little thing about an inch wide with a hole. It's like 3 millimeters, right? tiny changes can have enormous, results. And that's a good thing.
I also like that you said that I isolate the time of your practice. If you're going to make a change or an adjustment, don't do it within your regular practice session.
No. Or if you're a busy trumpeter, don't let it goof you up.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that. So that's something that I think a lot of professionals and students alike would go, oh my God, I can't make a change, or I'm working, or I'm in college, or I've got this recital, or whatever I've got in life, I can't make a change now. Maybe I'll do it next year. Meanwhile, they're dysfunctional for the next year until, well, I can't do it this year either.
And risking injury too, So I had to quit playing for a while because my chops were cut up and my teeth were loose, so I paid a high price, when I was a young player. But yeah, treat it like a second language where you become fluent in this and fluent in that. And, and you just practice it over here. You practice your Danish or your, Mandarin, and you don't forget how to speak English, and so you do your job, but you practice this over here. It's like a hobby. It's like a little game. And gradually you become fluent, or just you get good at both and it becomes assimilated a little bit. But
that's a great point. I love that.
I love it too. Peter Bond, this has been fantastic talking to you, everybody.
Thank you.
The new book is out. It's called The Singing Trumpet by Peter Bond, published by Carl Fisher. We hope you guys will check it out. We'll put a link down below so you guys can check it out and purchase it. Peter, thank you so much for being here and for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to chime in on some of the posts, and I'm sure there'll be some action there under this video, and we welcome it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, take care, guys. Stay cool. It's hot out there in the West Coast.
Oh gosh, it was 112 here, 110 yesterday. It was a scorcher, so we'll stay warm or stay cool.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm staying cool here in the South.
There you go. All right.
Cool.
Thanks again.
Beautiful.
Thank
Take
you.
care, guys. Thanks again.